Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining another episode of the Educational Leadership Podcast. We have another very special guest. Before we introduce our guest, we do want to give a shout out to our sponsor, Ideal Impact. Ideal Impact's giving away hundreds of millions of dollars to public education in the form of a free gift. So if your district needs unrestricted funds, reach out to Ideal Impact. Okay, today we have Dr. Hernandez. Dr. Hernandez is a board member at Edgewood ISD and also a teacher at Harlandale. Dr. Hernandez, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, absolutely. And just so everybody listening in gets to know you a little bit, tell us a little bit about your background.
So my background, I typically start pretty much my undergrad. I did not plan on going into teaching. I got an undergrad degree at Our Lady of Lake University here in San Antonio in psychology. So my bachelor's is in psychology. I went into the workforce, a lot of kind of like social work type, kind of like on the periphery of education. So I wasn't necessarily in education, but I was, helping students, volunteering. Um, I was considering actually going into counseling psychology. I did a semester of that. I'm not going to say where, but I did a semester of that, but it just wasn't my thing. Um, then of course I needed I needed to find an income, so I decided to apply for the pre-K 4 SA here in San Antonio. And for those that don't know what that is, that's kind of our city funded pre-K system that we have here. It's not, it's not huge, but it does serve lots of students here in San Antonio. So I actually worked there as an assistant teacher for pre-K students, and that was my introduction to education. um, I decided to pursue a master's degree in education. I went to the University of Utah for that one. So I was in Salt Lake City for about 2.5 years. I learned so much. I mean, I learned about teaching pedagogy. I learned theories of education, things like that. But for the most part, it was a more theoretical approach to education. So kind of understanding why do we educate children? What should we be educating them for? What purpose? Things like that. So it really wasn't in like classroom teaching. That was not something I was interested in. I eventually graduated, went into the workforce again. I worked at the children's shelter for a little bit. I was helping at their 24 hour facility. So they were actually, I worked with students with severe mental or emotional disorders. Um, and I did that for a little bit, but that was very taxing, emotionally, physically. Um, and and so I decided, not to do that anymore. Um, I went into kind of case management. I did some case management for sex trafficking victims. I did that at Roy Moss for about a year. So I was a case manager for that. And right at the end of that year, I decided to go back to graduate school. So I got into the PhD program at UTSA in interdisciplinary learning and teaching, and that's essentially where I studied. Originally, I wanted to study like politics and how children specifically form their opinions on politics and their views and things like that. But my first semester at UTSA, I believe it was my first or second, I learned about game research. So essentially how people and how children learn through gaming. And myself being a gamer like most of my life, even up to this day, I really kind of, I didn't realize that, people can research gaming, and more specifically, I research like how games facilitate social interaction, in children. And I did 3 years of that. Then during my fourth year, which was my dissertation year, there was a call out, in the education department for a part-time kind of contract teacher teaching technology applications and principles of IT. I currently teach tech apps, and so that was kind of like my guide into the public education system again. And so I did that for a year, graduated. I reapplied, to Harlandale, and I got hired to teach their tech apps and principles of IT to sixth, seventh, and eighth grade students, and that's currently what I do now. Yeah, and so I've kind of been there, so that's kind of where I am today.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah,
So,
long history.
yeah, it's so interesting, though. I don't think we've had anybody with a background similar to yours on the podcast. So that's amazing. Definitely started out in some really intense areas, it seems like, in public education, which I imagine, those areas help with growth and just different perspectives as well. So right now, what are you really passionate about in public education right now? What's your big focus, or what? Yeah, so tell us a little bit about that.
So my biggest passion right now um, has to do with technology, especially how to integrate it into the classroom. More specific, because this was a lot of my research was with gaming. Gaming right now, esports. I am an esports coach. I host a gaming club here every once a week, every Thursday after school, and I take a dual approach to it. So pretty much that technology can be a good thing, a very good thing, and I view it as a way to facilitate positive interactions with our students. And so, from my understanding, and it comes a lot of from my theoretical background, um, you know, games are an opportunity to make mistakes. And many theorists talk about this. So and that's just like we do in school. Like when students come to school, they're here, and they make mistakes, we correct them, and they learn. So essentially, I kind of weave that into my teaching and especially my gaming club. But I'm really passionate about how technology can facilitate those interactions, positive interactions. Of course, when there are negative interactions, that's when we have the lesson, we learn. There's a big emphasis from the state level, for our TEKS on cyberbullying, talking about how we shouldn't cyberbully, how we should be safe online, and all of those things are relevant, for social media, but also in the gaming aspect. And so I even had a guest speaker come in today. Actually, they just left talking about bullying and cyberbullying, and different ways to approach it. One of the things that I think I don't agree with is we can't avoid talking about these issues because they're happening right now, and so we cannot take a how should I say, maybe a I don't know if this is the correct word, but like an abstinence approach cyber safety and cybersecurity. And so I think we just need to to talk about these issues, talk about what's really going on in the students' lives, and we just kind of have to work through it together. And I think a big part of the hesitancy of talking about these online issues is because, frankly, many adults we're kind of not in tune with the daily goings on of what students are going through. They're having they're having access to the entire world at their fingertips. That can be a very positive interaction, but there are also very negative interactions that could occur. So those are the things I'm really passionate about, is using that technology for good, but also not seeing it as it's a technology versus a real person. You know what I mean? It's actually, those things can be synergistic in a way where some of the shy students who may not speak up a lot in class, when they're at my gaming club, they're some of the loudest students that they're in the room, and that really brings out a lot of their personality. And I really do see that. I saw it in my research, but I also see it every week in my gaming club and my interactions with the students. um so yeah, that's kind of my passion right now.
That's so interesting because we've had over 80 episodes of on the podcast, and we just no one's talked about this. No one's talked about this gaming area. So is this something that's newly being developed that you're kind of pioneering, or is there an area of public education that's just a big segment out there that not many people are talking about?
Well, research wise, I mean, there's been lots of publications on gaming research, how children learn through gaming, how adults learn through gaming, what gaming is, essentially what is a game, and things like that. Um, but on the public education sector, I would say it's relatively new. But of course, I think that has just a lot to do with um, just the opportunities that we have to make mistakes. Because, like I mentioned, playing a game or gaming is about making mistakes, and students are, and even I would even include teachers, we aren't allowed to make mistakes very often, because that could be our job, or that could be a negative grade, or things like that. There are ways around that, but I think gaming is one of those things that are, and this is also from my own research as well. um, many teachers, we aren't taught, or we haven't learned necessarily in academia through a game. And some of my research, that I've done in the past has focused on that teacher pedagogy. And if if teachers aren't if teachers aren't learning uh, through the ways that we want to teach the students, we're not going to use that pedagogy. For example, I'm telling you, hey, you can use this, A, B, and C program in your classroom. It does this, and that. But unless I, as a teacher, has seen that modeled by someone else or has learned through it myself, I'm very hesitant to use it in the classroom. And I saw that in my research, but I also see that even now as a teacher. And that's very similar with games. So with games, if we've never learned through a game, teachers aren't going to teach through using games. And there's another aspect of it where it's games can be seen as like a time waster. Oh, they're just playing games, they're not learning anything. But many of the research that I've read and that I've actually produced says the opposite. It's actually, if you want a successful game, that is going to teach students something. Because a bad game doesn't teach you anything. No one's going to want to play it. And it really depends what you're looking for. So for instance, I look at social interactions. So if someone is playing a game, I'm not looking at the content of the game. I'm looking at the social interaction that the game is providing or facilitating. So I have many, videos and pictures of students at our gaming club where they're happy, they're smiling, they're energetic, and very very few. And I told this to my assistant coach. I said, you're not going to see interactions like that in a regular classroom that's teaching the way we're expected to teach. You're just not going to see those kinds of interactions very rarely. But I get to see them very often because I do focus on project-based learning, and during my after-school program, focus on the gaming aspect. But it really depends what you're looking for. Because if you're looking for a specific game right now that kind of teaches you math, yes, there could be some that are kind of gamified, but for me, the experience always has to come first. Like when a designer is designing a game, the person has to enjoy the game first if you want them to come back. So I feel like a lot of the times in education, the content is put before the experience, and it becomes what's considered educating or edutainment. So, and then it's not really a good experience. So anyway, I know I threw a lot out there, but so that's
Yeah.
kind of my background. Yeah.
Well, you got me thinking. So, I've heard the phrase before, like treat life like a game, right? Like a
Oh yeah.
game. Um,
Yeah.
what's because I imagine when you do that, it kind of creates more of that growth mindset of like instead of being afraid of making mistakes, you're just moving forward and trying to get better. In your studies, have they talked about that much? Where just your perspective on things, like if you're doing a math assignment, think about it like a game. Don't think about it like the end of the world. Y'all, what are the studies and thoughts around that? Just kind of curious.
Yeah. So yeah. So I mean, I'm not as close to the research as I used to be, like when I was an actual grad student. But
Mm-hmm.
there was I can't remember the author, or if I do, I don't want to misrepresent. But um, there's instances where game-based learning researchers or gaming researchers, they mentioned playing life, like because you learn the rules of life. Like for instance, even in politics, or you learn the rules of politics, but essentially those rules, once you learn them, you can be flexible with them. And so I think in education we have lots of rules, but some rules are more important than others. Some you can kind of flex more than others. Some are the non-negotiables where you can't. Some are the ones that are kind of in the gray area. And then there are some rules, frankly, that really don't get enforced, so we kind of don't pay attention to them. But yeah, transference happens when we play games and we realize that, hey, once you learn the rules of how things are played, you're able to kind of navigate those contexts better. And so I think it does make players and students more flexible, right? Like, hey, if you lose once, hey, we learn through it and you move on. And so one perspective that I take, and it's not as easy as I'm mentioning it, but when you make a mistake, make your mistakes very quickly and then move on, right? Because the faster you can make mistakes, the faster you can learn, and the faster you can move on to something else. I think there is a perspective in education where and even myself as a teacher, it's sometimes I was more free to make mistakes as a researcher than a teacher. Because if I make a mistake as a researcher, I learn something, I can write about it and publish it. But if I make a mistake as a teacher, that could be my job, or that could be, you know, that has more serious consequences. Um, and so with students, it's kind of the same thing. I have an elective course with tech apps. We use technology every day. They use their computers. I have iPads they use as well. And it is a different perspective to where I expect them, I tell them, I expect you to make mistakes because that's how you're going to learn. You're not going to get what we're learning the first time. In fact, you shouldn't. If you do, then you should be at a higher level class. But I think it is a paradigm shift to focus on making those mistakes, and then learning from them quickly. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. That makes perfect sense. And it's difficult to practice, especially when the stakes are high.
Yeah,
But
definitely.
I guess if you look at the time horizon a little bit further out than hey immediate, because you're going to learn. There was a speaker I heard at one point that talked about they encourage their kids to make mistakes, right? I mean, they want them to do their best, but they encourage them to make mistakes instead of
Yeah.
looking at it like the end of the world.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I know we're running short on time here. Podcast only 20 minutes long. Love to
Oh
have
well.
you. Yeah. Want you to definitely want to have you on again. But before we close out, is there anybody in public education that's a leader that you think should come on here and share their story as well?
I have a lot, but I don't know if I feel comfortable about saying it on the record.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, but we can talk about it afterwards. Yeah.
Absolutely. Okay. Well, before we close out, any thoughts for our listeners before we close out?
Um, I mean, any thoughts? I just I if I'm assuming most of the people that listen to this are what, educators or non-educators, a
Yeah.
mix.
Superintendents, board members, people that are interested in public ed.
You know what? I mean, and as a board member as well, I mean, it's not very often where you get to be in the classroom, but I would encourage board members or even administrators, just go and say hi to your teachers. I mean, just ask them what they're doing, because very often, the only time we see administrators is when they're kind of evaluating us. You know what I mean? There's very little time to actually ask kind of informal in an informal space, which is another aspect of gaming research. But just go say hi, and it doesn't need to be a long time, 30 minutes or now, it's just a few minutes, just to let us know you're there. Um, because it really means a lot, because, you know, as a teacher, this is my second year teaching full time on a teaching certificate. It can be very isolating sometimes, right? When we're in our classroom, and teachers do a lot. Every teacher that I know is like superstar. No teacher just does the bare minimum. And so I think I would just encourage, other educators, if you've been outside of the classroom for a while, to have those brief conversations. But also, here's one thing, actually talking about that. It's very easy to say, well, do this. And this goes into my research, the pedagogy of how teachers learn. It's very easy to say, hey, I saw this. Well, why don't you do this or this or this? While assuming that we haven't already tried. I would say lead more with the questions rather than just saying, hey, try this, try this, try this, because there is a power dynamic, but also um, those are you cannot change an entire pedagogy by telling a teacher a few words. Like it's a process. And so I would just say, yeah, spend time with your teachers and let them know that, hey, we are doing a good job, because we know we're doing a good job, but it also, it you know human wise, like, it also feels great when we hear that, encouragement from the people that are evaluating us. So
Yep.
yeah, that's kind of my
Yeah.
message.
I love it. Yeah. Listen first, right? Spend a lot
Yeah,
of time listening before making recommendations. I love that. Well, awesome. Okay. Well, love to have you on here again, Dr. Hernandez. Before we close
definitely.
out, before we close out, we definitely want to give a shout out to our sponsor again, Ideal Impact. Ideal Impact's giving away hundreds of millions of dollars to public education in the form of a free gift. So if your district needs unrestricted funds, reach out to Ideal Impact. And for those that have been tuning in, stay tuned for future episodes of the Educational Leadership Podcast.